So, Takeshi Shudo is the main writer for the Pokemon anime. He is the creator of Lugia. And I mean, this is a very important Pokemon to Shudo. Because, can you imagine, you work on this series for years in your life, and then you're given the opportunity to create a Pokemon. Like, the first Pokemon, it's the only Pokemon Shudo ever created. But he had a very strong link with the creation of Lugia. And Shudo really felt that being an embodiment of the sea, an embodiment of, the creation of life that comes from deep water currents, it had to be a motherly Pokemon. It had to be a female Pokemon. And he was like really sad, really filled with anguish, as the video says, when they chose a male voice actor to voice Lugia. And I spent a few hours digging through his blog. And it's really a very interesting story, right? How much pain and anguish, like this gender dissonance before the idea he had for the creation and the final product had. It felt a little bit like this gender dissociation. I am very curious about it. Let me show you what I mean.
Felt strongly that as a maternal god, Lugia should have been voiced by a female actress. The film studio went against his wishes and chose a male actor instead. In the final year of his life, Shudo wrote at great lengths about the anguish this caused him. Here's just a few excerpts from his final months. One of the regrets I have about writing the second Pokemon movie was that I didn't push back on the gender assigned to Lugia. Although its gender isn't addressed in the plot, it's given a male voice, but it's a maternal Pokemon. To make matters worse, using a male voice actor for Lugia was a decision made during a big meeting with many participants. Advertisements had already aired. It was too late. We couldn't suddenly change Lugia into a female. But the more I thought about it, the less I could imagine X being anything else but female. I was gulping down alcohol and drugs. I started to feel like I wanted to die. Not only was Lugia voiced by a man, but it was made genderless in the games. Shudo wrote a lot about Lugia in the year before he died, but it was the loss of its maternal identity that pained him most. In late 2010, he collapsed in the smoking room of a train station and was rushed to the hospital, but tragically didn't survive. The cause of death was a...
That's horrible and that's heartbreaking, and it's very interesting to me, like, to try to understand why gender in itself was so important for Shudo, and like it's something that for many people would not be that important. Like, yeah, it's a fictional character. Like, why is being a woman so important for this creation, for this Pokemon? And I really wanted to see if I could find something else there. So I opened Shudo's blog. It's over here. I think these are all final entries from 2010. I think there are 2026 entries, and this is all automatically translated. And there is a lot about Lugia here that I was taking a look, right? And there was just one article that I wanted to share with you because it's gender, right? It's something that is a little bit close to home to us. And it's I really wanted to try. I mean, of course, myself coming from a transgender perspective, when I try to empathize with Shudo, of course, that is the lens that I will look at from. And I really want to... I went through some of these posts because I'm really trying to see if I can understand better his view on gender and why this is so important to him. And Pokemon Lugia was motherly. Lugia, male or female, it doesn't matter. Like Lugia Apocalypse. There is one text. Yes. So this is the one text I wanted to share with you, chat. If the essence of Lugia in the second Pokemon movie is not motherly, then at least I cannot agree with the story and team. However, Lugia was decided to be male. I thought about persuading the meeting attendees to change Lugia, who was decided to be male, to female. Like, it's almost kind of like a... I don't want to call it a dysphoria, I want to call it a dissonance, because you create this Pokemon, you create this creature, you create this character, and you have such a strong feeling for it. It's the only Pokemon that he created ever, and it's also the only Pokemon ever not to be created inside Game Freak, so it is quite important, like personally important. And it really hits home to me how gender was important when creating Lugia. And then when I was reading this, it's very funny because it reminded me of my argument in the Chikorita video, right? In particular, the person who holds the... Sorry, and this is automatically translated. I'm so sorry if it sounds weird. In particular, the person who holds the initiative in the meeting imagines Lugia as a powerful male, so it's hopeless to overturn the decision of the meeting. Like, Lugia is powerful, Lugia is the master of the legendary birds, like Aeroblast, things exploding, so, you know, a powerful male. Then Shudo thought of a sneaky way to do it. For example, nouns in French have gender. The C is a feminine noun. I don't know why. I just thought that there must be something about the C that makes you think of a woman, but what about the fact that the C is feminine in French? Pokemon is not an anime made for France. The punchline is that the audience for Pokemon is not only Japan, but the whole world. Changing the gender of Lugia, which was decided by majority vote from male to female, is not very persuasive. And Shudo gave up. After all, it's an action-adventure. No one would be convinced that Lugia is female because the C is feminine in French. And it is a funny argument. Like, in Portuguese, the C is male. But it also reminds me of ContraPoints' arguments a lot, like, about the inherent femininity of the C. And it does make a lot of sense, but it's like... It's trying to assign gender to things that are very, you know... that don't have gender, don't have, like... It's the C. It's a legendary Pokemon, right? Why is it so important to assign a binary gender to it? And I'm just trying to understand, like, I really want to get through this blog to try to understand why assigning a gender, the gender Shudo wants to Lugia, is that important. And, like, it's crazy. At that time, I had a workplace very close to the fishing port of Odawara. From morning to night, I went to the beach or the pier of the port and just looked at the sea. The problem for me was whether I could think of the sea as male. However, I could not come to a conclusion by just staring blankly. I can't portray Lugia's behavior unless I deceive myself to a certain extent and decide that the sea is male. So in order to accept that his creation, that Lugia could be male, he would need to see the sea as male. Which is wild! And then he bought 5 or 6 bottles of sake from a vending machine. 6 bottles of sake, which is a lot of alcohol. A lot of alcohol. Put them in a plastic bag and take them to the beach. Of course, I did the same thing when I was writing another novel with the theme of the sea and got stuck. It's a fishing port, and then he talks about how he was trying to avoid, like, police and securities from people trying to stop him from drinking too much, which someone should have. Like, it's very sad, honestly. You haven't been, like, he would drink there so often that people would notice when he would stop going because they would sell less bottles, and that's crazy. But to understand Lugia as male, he was going to the sea, drinking and looking at the sea, like, it's kind of crazy. Hi dear stranger online, editing Cecilia here. I still didn't have time to go through the over 250 posts on Takeshi Shudo's blog, so there might still be something there, but I did want to add this answer that I got from Pyrocephals, that is also someone that went through the blog a year ago, and I think this adds to what we're talking about, and I really wanted to have this in this stream highlight. So, Pyro writes, I went through a deep dive of his blog post myself almost a year ago now. They're extremely fascinating and really quite somber to read. I feel like many people when referring to Lugia don't know the context of his other work before Pokemon, such as me. I didn't know. A novel series, Eternal Philena, a story about a woman who was raised as a boy but learns to live by her own accord and has themes revolving around the life force of the sea. He wrote it over the course of a decade, and though it's definitely a work of its time, it's really fascinating to see him pushing boundaries of characters' gender expression explored in the 80s, and to see how these themes bleed over into his other work, like Pokemon. It was clearly something he felt passionate about, and I've always thought it's a shame whenever people try to turn his disappointment regarding his vision of Lugia as a maternal force into something weird or obsessive, when this seemed to just be frustration from one of many cases where his artistic intention seemed to be erased due to inconsequential whims of supervisors. And here's also a screenshot from the blog. Let me zoom out a little bit. In order to write the novel, I moved from Shibuya to Hayakawa, which is home to the port that we just read earlier in the video. The JR station closest to sea in Japan, and lived there for 20 years. So, he has a very strong feeling about the ocean. The basic story is about the life-giving power of the ocean that has made Earth a planet overflowing with life, and the story of a woman who decides to live on this irreplaceable planet. Am I saying there? And again, here, what I'm trying to say here is that it's really interesting to me how strongly he feels about gender, how strong his relation is to the sea, really, and how that bleeds into the frustration of Lugia. I don't think it's weird, I don't think it's obsessive, and, I really want to try and look at the blog, to try and understand, what is this man's relation with this feminine power of creating life, and why that is something that he's so adamant to put through his work. I always stared blankly at the rough sea when a typhoon was approaching, and that's an imagery that I connect very closely to the second Pokemon movie, Pokemon 2000. Imagine Shudo alone at the beach, drinking sake, watching the rain, the storm on the sea, and watching a typhoon form. And just look at the aesthetic from this movie, right? It's like this. Not this, but like this, There's an underwater Lugia scene that I'm... Like this attack from Lugia, I think it's the aesthetic, this rainy power of life that Shudo was going for, and that's kind of... I'm thinking a lot about this. But back to the text. When I started writing the script for Lugia's birth, I started to look at the sea consciously. But sometimes it's masculine, sometimes it's feminine, and the sea changes its appearance depending on the wind. But I began to feel that it's just there. Perhaps it was because my brain was dulled by alcohol, but I began to feel that even if the sea gave birth to life, gender is not important. For me, a scriptwriter, the sea needs to be maternal. I don't know, these two phrases don't make a lot of sense together. Maybe it's just the translation. For me, a scriptwriter, the sea needs to be maternal. However, I also felt that whether Lugia, the symbol of the sea for the characters in the work, is male or female depends on how the characters feel about it. So, gender is about how you're perceived, right? In other words, for me, a scriptwriter, Lugia's behavior is feminine, behavior that represents motherhood. But depending on the characters, it doesn't matter if Lugia appears to be paternal behavior with a man's voice. It's an action-adventure, it has the theme of coexistence, and the characters can coexist if they just stay true to themselves without forcing themselves. In other words, if you portray what the characters are, rather than what Lugia is, you will naturally understand the existence of Lugia. The meaning of coexistence will emerge. The villain, that I forgot the name in English, is a collector. I think it's just called a collector, right? No matter what happens to the world, he will always be a collector. But Lugia, it depends on who's looking at Lugia, right? And if that's not a gender studies class, I don't know what it is. There are a lot of posts here about Lugia, a lot of posts about Lugia. And it's kind of crazy. I didn't read everything yet, but Pokemon Lugia was motherly, right? Before I started writing the script, I was so sure that it doesn't make difference whether it's a man or a woman's. But it stops the three-way fight, which is destroying the balance of nature. It's the symbol. He's like a mother to fire, thunder, and ice. If a mother tries to stop her children's sibling fight, it must be different from a way a father does it. Its actions are driven by maternal instincts. And this is super crazy. I really want to dive into this text because I feel like there might be a video in there, but maybe everything that there was to say was already discussed by Digital Gaming. I don't know. This is a lot. So yeah, I just wanted to share this because I think it's super interesting. Looking from a genderqueer perspective, this is even more interesting to, you know, thinking about legendary Pokemon and genderless Pokemon and this man's journey of like, okay, they took this character out. They took this character out of my hands that I was super sure it was a female character and assigned them as male. What does that mean? What, like, Shudo had to go through his entire conception of gender to try and conceive that his creation was assigned a different gender than what he felt that was? Again, I am definitely reading this from a trans lens because that's who I am, that's my life experience, that's usually what I do. But I think it is kind of it kind of is a genderqueer narrative in a way. And for Shudo to come to a conclusion that at the end, for him, Lugia can be feminine, but at the end, it's an entity that is going to signify different things for different peoples and for different characters in the text. Something really interesting to think about. Also, something funny to talk about is that in Portuguese, they usually use different articles for Lugia, so I have heard a lot of people calling Lugia with the feminine article, a Lugia, but it's not something that is set in stone. At least that maybe could have been comforting for Shudo, even though the voice actor was male. I don't know.